every conversation at work should be framed correctly. And by framing, it means setting up your audience to receive your information, hear your question. There's a 3-part process to framing a conversation. It takes 10 to 15 seconds. And in those 10 to 15 seconds, you should provide context for the topic you're going to talk about, the intent, what you want the person to do with the information, and then a 1-line summary of the information that you're going to give. And the framing, that first 10 seconds, is incredibly important to bring your audience into the right frame of mind to hear what you want to say and be engaged in a conversation. So the first part of that is context. That is, of all the possible topics in the whole world you could talk about, name the one that you want to talk about. Because I guarantee it's not what's in your audience's head. They're thinking about anything else. They're thinking about what to have for lunch. They're thinking about a budget report. They're thinking about a soccer match from last night. They could be thinking about absolutely anything. Even if you've just come out of the same meeting about the same project or program or task, and you were sitting next to them and you walk out of the room, what's in their head is not going to be what's in your head. So the first thing you do is provide context. And it's very simple. Just say, hey, I want to talk about this project. Or, hey, I want to talk about the thing that happened with James last week. Or I want to talk about the budget. Or I want to talk about the sales event. Just name the thing. And that helps remove all the other stuff from the person that you're talking to's head. And they are going, okay, so this is what you want to talk about.
Well, you mentioned some of what's going on. I think unconsciously, they have to interpret. If you don't provide the context, then they have to interpret themselves as to whether or not how it applies to them and that sort of thing. And that can be almost costly, I think, is the right framing on that. And they can get the wrong interpretation if they have to interpret themselves, right?
They can, because they're trying to fit this into all the possible meanings. And not only can they get the wrong outcome, which is one of the things you've highlighted, that's quite bad, because it means they're then listening to the rest of the conversation with the wrong lens. And the example of that is if you've ever had a conversation where you get halfway through and go, oh, hang on, are we talking about that? Because I thought we were talking about this. Those conversations are where they've not been framed correctly and you've got the wrong topic. So it can have all kinds of wasted time and other problems because you're making assumptions. But it also means they're not listening to what you're saying, because their brain is going, what am I doing with this? What are we talking about? What are we talking about? And until it can answer that question, it won't be able to process the information in the way that you want. There's a bunch of science behind this. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I love that topic, but I'm not going to go into the details here. But there's a lot of science that says until our brain knows what to do with a piece of information, we struggle to take in anything else. Which is why, and this neatly comes on to the second part of framing. So once you've provided context and you've given a topic, the second part of framing is to provide intent. And if I'm talking to you, I need to let you know what I need you to do with this information. Am I asking you for help? Are you going to need to take an action? Is this just gossip? What is the purpose and what do I need from you? And this goes back to the same things I've just talked about, that your brain is going to be saying, well, so what? What do I do with this? Am I going to have to do something at the end? And until we know what to do with the information, we don't know where to store it or how to process it. And it stops us from listening. And again, with that void of information, unless somebody says, hey, I've got a question. And you're like, okay, I'm ready. I'm primed. I'm going to be ready to give an answer. Unless someone gives you that, you spend the whole time going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And it's very distracting for ourselves, and it means that the conversation is just not effective right from the start. The third part is the key message. And the simplest way to think of that is it's the headline for everything else you're going to talk about. You're not condensing the whole of your conversation into 10 words, but you're giving the headline. And the way to think of this is imagine switching on the news, and the first thing they say is way down in the detail of the news story. They're talking about some trade agreement post-Brexit, you take a bit of time trying to work out, well, what are they talking about? How does this relate to me? What's going on? Is this big or important? And the news never does that. They always start with a headline. And then they start with a summary, and then they go down into the detail of the topic they want to cover. And that headline helps prepare us as an audience for what we're going to hear. And it gives us a reference point for everything else that comes in that article. And so the key message is the third part. So context, intent, and key message in the first 10 to 15 seconds, less than 20 words, you've then got your audience away from thinking about the tennis match they're having at the weekend or the bad meeting they just came out of. They're thinking about your project, your topic. They know what is expected of them, and they have some idea of the topic of the conversation that's about to happen, all within 10 to 15 seconds, and you've just set up a conversation to be successful.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of the things in the book, which is I hear people I hear objections as we're talking about things, and one of the objections which you covered almost immediately was the book's the first minute. The first minute of the conversation or the work conversation is not the first minute that you're interacting with that person.
Yeah,
it starts off personally. You go ahead. You're better at explaining it than me.
You're absolutely raising a point, and thank you so much. Because if we don't talk about this, people are going to be saying, "Well, this flies in the face of all the other communications advice I've ever been taught." So most communications courses, advice, gurus, experts will say, and just human nature will tell us that interpersonal skills, getting to know people, relationship building, that should be part of work conversations. That should be part of everyday conversations that we have. I 100% agree. The context of the first minute starts when you talk about the work topic. So if you bump into someone and you want to talk about the weekend, or you want to chat about anything at all, ask about the kids, do that. Absolutely do that, as much as is appropriate for the situation. But the moment you want to turn the topic of conversation to work, that's when the clock begins on the first minute. And that's when you've got to frame what comes next for the work conversation.